Hello guys, good evening. So let's revise previous class. So yesterday we have seen what are the kinds of Azure storages which are provided by Microsoft. So these are the four types of storages which are provided by Azure. Uh, So the first one is file storage. So when you want to share the files from on-premise to cloud or cloud to on-premise, you will use this file storage. And queue is a messaging service. So when will you use this queues? So when you want to send the message between the components, then you'll be using this storage queue. And coming to table storage, it is a NoSQL solution to store a structured data which doesn't guarantee you the schema. And coming to the blob storage, so we have seen that there are three types of blob storage. So when will you use this blob? So when your data won't be modified at all in the future, then you'll go for this blob. When will you go for this append blob is, so for example logs, when you want to that is if your data comes incrementally and your requirement here is to append the data every time you use, then you will go for this append blobs. And coming to page blobs, if you want to perform random read and write operations, then you'll be going to this page blobs. And these are all the three types of tires which we have seen: hot axis, cold axis, and archive axis. Can anyone tell me, like, when will you use this hot axis tire?
Frequent as
Yeah, frequently accessed ones are present in hot access tier, and not
Security levels
frequently.
are very low,
What?
very less security levels, right? For this one, hot access.
Security? No, security is not the parameter for these tires. So the differences which you consider uh, this see the things which you need to consider while selecting the tires are this read and write access cost and the storage cost. That is the access cost and storage cost. So these are the things you need to consider while selecting these tires. So security aspect doesn't come here. So frequently accessed ones will be present in the hot access tier, and non-frequently accessed ones are present in the cold access tier and in the archive tier. So if you have a data which is not touched for 180 days, so you have a data which is not being touched for 180 days, then you will move that data to the archive access tier. So the data present in the archive access tier will be in compressed form. So that is the reason the retrieval cost will be high. So coming to storage performance tier, we have two tiers: the standard performance and premium. So in standard, HDDs will be used, and in premium storage, these SSDs will be used in the backend to store the data. So that's it. That's all about the yesterday's class. So let me share today's class content. So in today's class, we will be learning what is Azure Data Factory and the important concepts in Azure Data Factory, that are the important main components in the Azure Data Factory. So are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So coming to this Azure Data Factory, Azure Data Factory is a cloud-based ETL and data integration service that allows you to create data-driven workflows. So why these workflows are created? For orchestrating the data movement and transforming the data at scale. So what do you mean by all this is? Data Factory is a service which is offered by Azure Cloud. So we have discussed that Azure will be providing us many services. So one of the services, this Data Factory. This Data Factory is a service which is provided by Azure. And so where is this present? Is it present on premises, or is it present in cloud? Who is providing this Azure Data Factory?
Cloud.
Yeah. So who is providing this Azure Data
Azure.
Factory? Yeah. Azure is the cloud service
Azure.
provider. Okay. So here we can see that it is the cloud-based ETL. So in the data we have discussed what is the concept of ETL and all the traditional tools which are available on premises. But here if you see this Azure Data Factory, it is a cloud-based ETL. So it is a cloud-based ETL. That means it is an offering offered by Azure. And data integration service. So what do you mean by data integration service? So data integration service means to fetch the data from different sources, the data factory should be able to establish the connection with those sources. So whenever this Azure Data Factory wants to fetch the data from different sources, first it should establish the connection to that source. So the ability to connect to different sources is called integration. So that is what it is meant by the data integration. So what is this data integration? It is the ability to connect to the different sources of data. So here, since it is an integration service, it will be able to connect to different sources of data like databases, blob storage, data lake storage, etc. So the other thing is that it allows you to create data driven workflows. So what do you mean by this data driven workflows? It means it allows us to create workflows. So what will these workflows do? This will perform operations on the data. So in the first of what you are doing, data ingestion. That is, you will connect to the resource. So once you connect to the source of the data, you will fetch the data from that resource and perform the transformations using the workflows. Okay. So now coming to orchestration. So what do you mean by the word orchestration? So orchestrating means organizing. That is, you will be able to define which thing to perform first and which thing to perform next. Orchestrating the data movement means organizing the data movement. So this is, you will be organizing the things, organizing the flow, which activity should be performed at first and which activity should be performed at next. So here you will be orchestrating means nothing but it's the organizing. And once you organize the movement, then you will be performing the transformations on the data. So that is all meant by this definition. So this definition is very very important for you. So people, when you attend an interview, definitely if they ask you what is data factory, you need to tell all these points. So that is the reason I have documented all these points, so that it will be easy for you to refer to the document when you attend an interview. So coming to the second point, using Azure Data Factory, you can create and schedule the data driven workflows. So basically in the layman terms, you will be calling workflows. But in Azure terms, you will be calling these workflows as pipelines. So what will these pipelines do? They can ingest the data from the disparate data stores. So what do you mean by this is workflow. I have told you that workflow is nothing but, so what do you mean by this workflow is, it is nothing but a step by step processing. So for example, if your flow is like, let me share my paint. So here if you see, so if I have a task, so what is the task is, the first one is get the data from on premises. Next, perform trans. So this is my flow. So what are you guys seeing? Yeah. So for example, let's think this is the task which we have been given. So what is the thing we need to do is, first we need to get the data from on premises and then perform transformations on the data and then load the data into the Azure Synapse. So if we see here, we are having three steps. So here we are having three different actions to be performed. First one is getting the data from on premises, and the second one is performing the transformations on the data which you have got from on premises, and the last one is loading the data into the Azure Synapse. So all these steps combined together form a workflow. Here you can see there is flow. So first this step should be performed, next this step should be performed, and next this step should be performed. So here what we are doing, we are combining all the small tasks, all small actions are combined into a workflow.
Excuse me,
So
what is the staging state in this flow? Staging criteria in this flow.
no, nothing as staging. It's just an example which you have given, which so staging concept is not present here.
Because
So in the
we
example,
getting the data.
see where is the staging is present is, so once we get the data from on premises, we should keep this data somewhere. So that somewhere is the staging area. So you get the data from on premises, put it on, put it in data lake. So then perform the run. So this becomes your staging area. Okay. So once you pick the
Shish,
data from on premises, there should be somewhere you keep the data. So that somewhere is data lake. You are dumping all the data which you picked from on premises to data lake. That will be your staging area. And from there, you will be performing transformations on that data lake and then load the data into Azure Synapse. Yeah, someone is asking something.
yeah, Shishna, it's me, Purushottam. Actually, here that the data only from the on-premises or any like other sources like SharePoint, Amazon Redshift, like that. Any
So
other
it
also
can,
it will work.
yeah, it can be anything.
Usually, on-premises
Yeah.
means we are using like our local desktop to cloud, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the data is coming from the on-premises or any data source from there to data lake. In data lake, we are doing all the ETL activities. From there to it will go to Azure Synapses. So here,
Yeah.
three kinds of data sources is there. Sorry, three kinds of data storage things is there. One is on premises. Second one is Azure Data Lake. Third one is Azure Synapses. So
Yes.
if I think like the raw data will be in that on premises, cleaning data will be in Azure Synapses, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. You're right.
Yeah. Okay.
So you'll run, since it's the data lake, you can directly dump your raw data without any processing into the data lake. So if your staging area is a data warehouse, then you should make some transformations before itself. You put the data into the data warehouse. Since it is data lake, you can directly dump all the raw data from on premises to the data lake. Okay, so here I'm not telling you guys about that concept, just it's an example where I'm telling you like what is a workflow. So here you are doing many activities and you are combining all these activities with the help of workflow. So this workflow is a layman term, but in Azure terms this workflow is called as, what is this workflow called in Azure terms? I have told you.
Pipeline.
Yes.
Hello, sister. Hello,
Yeah.
hello. Yeah. Sorry for interrupt. I am 10 minutes late for connect to. Uh, if you don't mind, now only started before 20 minutes started class.
Yeah, we have started 5 minutes before. Just we have covered these 2 points. So once you can directly go through the recording, so you won't be having
Okay,
any.
sure. Okay.
Yeah, just this only one point we have covered. That's it. So these workflows are called as pipelines in Azure terms. So coming to, yeah. So coming to the third point, we can build complex ETL processes that transform the data visually with data flows, or by using compute services such as Azure HD Insight, Azure Databricks, and Azure Databases. So what do you mean by this is? So what you do in ETL process, first you'll extract the data and then perform the transformations. So that is, you can I have told you that Azure Data Factory is a ETL tool. So first you ingest the data from the sources, and then what you need to do, you need to perform some transformations. So these transformations can be performed visually. So if you want to perform the transformations visually without writing any code, so what you can do, you can use this data flows. But if you want to write your customized code, so if you are interested to write a code, and if you are not able to do a task using all the resources which are available on Azure Data Factory, then you will be using the compute services like Azure Databricks or Azure HD Insight or Azure SQL Database, where you will be writing your own code, that is own queries. So if at all you are not able to perform your transformations using Azure Data Flows, then you will go with this compute services. Okay. Then coming to this,
Actually, Azure data pipeline. I mean, what is the cost difference between the manual we define the pipeline and Azure
visual. So
we go
nothing.
through the
There is
Azure.
nothing different. So what happens
Okay.
here is the Azure Data Factory, it will provide you an ability. That is, it will provide you an ability to visually perform the transformations. So instead of for you to write the code, you can directly use the components. without writing the
Okay,
code.
so
So if you want,
the pricing
yeah,
cost, would be pricing cost will be different or the same price cost, no
pricing
service
will be
cost.
different. So these
Okay,
are costly. Azure Databricks and these are costly. So this Azure Data Factory will be less costed.
okay.
Yeah. So to build the complex ETL process, you can eitherly perform the transformations visually using the data flows, or else you can use the compute services wherein you can write your own customized code. So coming to this point, you can publish your transformed data to the data stores such as Azure Synapse Analytics. So what this means you can send the processed data to the data stores such as Azure Synapse or Azure Data Lake. So from there, once you keep all your process data in those storages, from there this business intelligent applications can consume the data from there. So once you keep
Uh,
all your process data in the Azure Synapse or Azure Data Lake storage, what happens is the business users access the data from there and use it.
Azure Synapse and what is the difference between the Azure Synapse and Data Lake? Both are a
See,
storage device or
yeah, both are used for
I,
storage. But if you have only the structured data, you can store it in the Azure Synapse. Azure Synapse is a warehouse. It's a modern data warehouse. Whereas Azure Data Lake, if you have all kinds of data, like if you are having structured data, unstructured data, semi-structured data, and you should store all these kinds of data, then you will go for Azure Data Lake storage instead of Azure Synapse.
so, Shisha, all these kind of transformation steps, where it will be placed in Azure Data Lake, right? Like transformation is, I
No,
think,
no,
like a
no, no.
manually. Hmm,
See, transformations are the operations which you perform on your data. So all these steps, where you will be doing is you will be doing all these steps in Azure Data Factory.
okay.
So
So,
I'll
like
show
Azure
you.
Data Lake. Okay, yeah, go
Azure
ahead.
Data Lake is just for storage purpose. Azure
For raw data.
Synapse is also for storage.
Okay,
So Data Lake and Synapse are the storage ones.
okay.
No, even in SQL database also you can store, right? So what is the difference? Consider the SQL database.
Difference between SQL database and,
Data lake.
see, that is what I have told now. So if it's an SQL database, you'll be able to store only the structured data. Whereas in this data lake, you will be able to store structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data also.
But both we can use it for data integration, right? SQL as well as data lake also, right?
Yeah.
If my
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Someone.
no no if data is a semi-structured or unstructured, what kind of transformation we can do? But you can give some example.
See, coming to the semi-structured data. So semi-structured data, the examples of semi-structured data are JSON. So if you are
Okay,
dealing
okay,
with JSON data, you will be having some transformations. So once I open the Azure portal, I'll show you where you can see all those transformations. So using those transformations, you will convert that semi-structured data, that is JSON data, into the structured form and then store it into Azure Synapse. So coming
yeah,
to
okay.
unstructured
Mongo,
data, so, yeah,
no SQL data means which we use the data lake or Azure Data Snaps because no SQL data
I think
is
data lake,
unstructured anything.
data lake. I think
Data
yeah.
lake.
So why are you using data lake?
for storing
Because it is
unstructured and
not structured.
Okay.
Yeah. So NoSQL things, NoSQL formats are not the structured one. They do not have schema. So that is the reason you will go and store it in the data lake.
Okay. Right.
Um, yeah. So this is the important definition. Definitely you will be asked in interviews. So if they ask you what is Azure Data Factory, you have to tell them that Azure Data Factory is a cloud-based ETL and it is an ingestion service. Data ingestion services, I have told you that you will be able to ingest the data. You will be able to connect to different sources and ingest the data. So this Azure Data Factory will allow us to create workflows. That is, it will allow us to create pipelines. Why do we need these pipelines? For orchestrating the data movement and transforming the data at scale. Okay, so these are the things which you know you should understand them clearly, and I would also request you, suggest you to buy heart if possible. So definitely they'll be asking you like what is this Azure Data Factory. So these are all the points you need to tell them. So okay, I'll share my screen and let's create an Azure Data Factory. So the other point here is, so once after creating the Azure Data Factory service, once you click on the Launch Studio, it will redirect you to this URL, this page. So let's see that. So here if you see, so how do you search for data factories? It is data factories. So here in the word I have kept you the symbol. This is the thing. It's not Azure Data Factory. So this is how you search. It's data factories. This is the name of the service, Azure Data Factories. So only data factories. It's not Azure Data Factories. So, and then you need to click on create. You can either click here or you can click here. So what is the first thing you have to do here?
Resource group we have to create.
Yeah. So whenever you create a resource, it should definitely be part of a resource group. So here first I will be creating a resource group. So once after giving the creating the resource group, we should name our data factory. So here I have told you that there are many regions which are available. So regions, so based upon where is your project present, where are your project users, so based on that you will be selecting the region. And why are we selecting this East US? East US is the Azure's main data center where all the services are present. So in few data centers, few services will be present, and in few data centers, other few services will be present. But coming to the East US, all services will be present here. So that is the reason I'll be selecting East US. And coming to a version, This is the version 2. Previously we used to have data factory version 1. So yeah, it's not available now. Only v2 version is available for us now. Next, git configuration. So we'll be doing this later. So here, once you complete filling all your information, it will do a validation. So once your validation gets passed, then only this create button will be visible. It will become accessible to us. So if you click on create, then this data factory starts getting deployed. So here under the notifications, you can see. So here it's telling that initializing the deployment. So once the deployment gets completed, you will be able to see. So here you can see that status will be getting changed. So once it gets successfully deployed, then you will get a other notification saying that it got deployed. So the deployment is in progress here. Yeah, see, if we see here, yeah, our deployment got completed. So see the subscription, it is the free trial subscription, and the resource group, this is the resource group we have created. So now we can go to the resource. So this is our data factory which we have created. So these, in the overview, you will be able to see what are the things which you have entered. So our resource group is this, and our subscription is the free trial. So if at all you want to move this Azure Data Factory from one resource group to other resource group, you can click on move, and you can move the data factory to other resource group. And subscription also. If you want to move this data factory from one subscription to other subscription also, you can move it by clicking move. So this is what I have written in that point. So once you click on launch studio, you will be redirected to adf.azure.com. So here you will be redirect to Azure Data Factory Studio. Azure Data Factory Studio is a platform where you perform all your things, creating pipelines, doing transformations, etc. etc. So you'll be doing in Azure Data Factory Studio. So here we can see. So this is the page. It gets open whenever you click on Launch Studio. So this is the home page which you are now seeing. Then here comes the author. So in this author, you I have told you that we will be discussing the important components present in the Azure Data Factory. So pipeline is one of the important component of the Azure Data Factory, and data sets is also one of the one. And coming to monitor, here you will be able to monitor the pipeline executions. So whatever the pipelines you have created, you can monitor them. from here. So to automate the pipelines, you will be using triggers. So if you run your pipeline using triggers, then you will be able to see all of them below this. And also you'll be having the concept of integration runtime. It is not, but we won't be discussing it today. So by default, an auto resolve integration runtimes gets created. So we'll be discussing this. What is this in further coming sessions? So linked service is the other one which we are going to discuss today. It is one among the important components of Azure Data Factory. So this is the manage tab. So just you'll be having some. It's just like a learning center. So this is the manage tab, and this is the learning center. Okay, just have given you the overview and how will it look like. But now just go back to the Word document and discuss what are all these components in detail. So are you guys able to see this Word document?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are all the important concepts in the Azure Data Factory. The first one coming is the data sets. So before that, you'll be having something called as linked service. I forgot writing here. So linked service is just like a connection string. So this, wait, let me write that in the paint. So one of the component is linked service. So what is this linked service? This linked service, it is just like a connection string. So this linked service, what is this linked services? It is just like a connection string. So basically in Java or in Python, you will be using this connection strings. So what will be there in this connection string is you will be having the um, credentials which are required for authentication. So it's like you'll be giving your username and password, all the things which are necessary for you to connect to a external resource. So this linked service, it is just like a connection string which contains the connection information required to connect to an external resource. So let's see, like, where is this linked service present in this. So here is where a linked service is present. So from here you can create a linked service. So why do you use this linked service? This contains the connection information to link the data factory to a data store or any compute service. So this is the first thing which you need to know about. So once you establish connection to a resource, what is the next step you do? You will extract the information from that resource. So for extracting the information from that resource, what you need to have is the data set. So for example, let's consider that we are trying to move the data from a blob storage. So in blob storage, as we have discussed yesterday, we can have any number of containers in the blob storage. So you are trying to move the data from one container. So first let's assume that under our blob storage we are having 10 folders. So few of them are orders, customers, sales, inventory. So what is my task here is I need to move all the files which are present under the order folder, orders container. So what will I do? I should specifically point to the orders folder. So tell you precisely. So what happens here is first I will be having so this is my blob storage. So inside the blob storage I'm having many folders. So let's consider I have four containers. So containers and folders are same. So in Azure terms, under blob storage, you will be calling the folders as containers. So if we see here, we have four containers. So the first one is orders, and the second one is sales, and so on. The other ones. So what is my requirement here is I want to. So this is all my blob storage. So here, the first thing what you will do in the flow, first you will connect to this blob storage. So how will you connect to this blob storage? We have discussed that concept. How you connect to a resource using what?
Actually, once we upload a file to the blob storage, then one link will generate. We can copy the link and I think we can use the same link in ADF.
Yes, that is the link you use for creating linked service. So that is called as key. Key is used to so yeah, this linked service will hold that key. So here
So,
the connection string is. So
okay.
here in this example, first what you will do, you will create a linked service in Azure Data Factory. So what will this linked service do? It will establish the relation between Azure Data Factory and the blob storage. Okay.
Shishra, I have a question. Actually, is it
Yeah.
mandatory to upload every of data source to blob storage? That means in ADF
No, no,
screen
no.
only, shall we get a data source, like some different data source like sorry, like Amazon Redshift is there. My data is in Amazon Redshift. So shall I directly
Yes.
connect the Amazon Redshift from
Yeah.
ADF?
Yes. You can directly connect to it.
Okay.
You can directly, so in the linked service you will be providing all the details of that Amazon, I mean the
Yes.
credentials. Yeah,
Okay.
in the linked service you will be providing all those credentials, and then establish the connection between Azure Data Factory and that Amazon service, and from there you can get the data. So here in our example we are using the blob storage. This blob storage is provided by Azure itself.
Yes.
So first we will create this linked service. So what is this linked service doing? This linked service is establishing the relation between the Azure Data Factory and blob storage. So what is happening? Uh, if we see diagrammatically, so this is my ADF. So what am I doing now? So here you are establishing the connection is getting established via linked service. So this is how. So linked service is the one which is establishing the connection between the blob storage and Azure Data Factory. Okay. So what is happening? I'm just able to connect to the blob storage, but I'm not able to specifically specify which container I'm pointing to. So to point to the to particular container, which I want to move to some other blobs, some other. Uh, let's take our destination is Synapse. So here my destination is Synapse. So what will I do? First thing is I'll establish a connection between Azure Data Factory and blob storage using a linked service. Next, also I should establish the connection between the Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse. So how will you establish the connection between Azure Data Factory and other resource? Using what? Using what you will
Link,
establish the connection?
With link.
link itself.
Yeah, linked service. So what happens here? So we are just establishing the connection, but we are not particularly pointing to a particular container. So here, what is our next step? We want to particularly point to this particular container, sales container. I want to point to this particular sales container. So you can point to this particular sales container using a concept called data set. So here, if I want to, uh, so how can I connect sales, connect to the sales container from ADFS through data set. So here comes the concept of data set. So using linked service, you will just be able to connect to that particular service, but you won't be able to internally point to a certain container or a certain table. If you take Azure Synapse, you should point to a certain table. But if you want to connect to a particular table, then you should use the concept of this data set. So now let's see what is this data set.
Relation database. I think CSV file like data set. row and
What?
column files.
What?
Data set is the CSV file in like structure format, like data.
No, data set is just a pointer. It's just a reference. It's nothing. It's
Okay,
just
okay.
a reference. So here, if you come to the concept of data set, so let's take an example and discuss it. So let's imagine that we have logged in to the Facebook. So what we will do, we will look at post, share some photos, messages, etc. So what are we doing here? We are dealing with the data. So as soon as we logged in, we are able to see lot of data. Likewise, what happens here is, so what happens here is, if we consider this example which we have written in the pane, so what happens here? See, are you able to see my paint?
Yes.
So in the blob storage, in the first step, we are able to connect to the blob storage using linked service. So in the blob storage which we have created, it is having multiple folders. But what is our requirement here? Here our requirement is that we only need to access the particular folder. So what is this particular folder? We need to access only the sales folder. How can you do this? Is you will use the concept of dataset here. So using the dataset, you can only refer to the particular container. Okay.
See, under the sales container, if I have multiple files, right? So whether I
Yeah.
need to create a multiple data set or only one data set is there.
See, if you are having multiple files, you will be creating only single data set. You will use a for loop to loop through those all the files.
Okay. So
Yeah.
if it is like a database, right? For example, it's a database. So for example, I use the link service to connect the SQL database. So in the data set, I need to mention only the particular table is something similar, right? It's the correct way. My understanding is correct.
Yeah. That's the correct. So in the linked service, you will give the
Connect the
connection
DB.
details to the database.
Okay.
So
And the
whereas in
data
the
set, I
data,
will.
you will
Yeah.
mention the table name. So here also it's same. Um, in the linked service, you will be giving the blob storage name, whereas coming to the data sets, so yeah, the data sets will change. So each data set will be used to connect to each container. So once you access the container, you will for loop through all the files available in that container. So yeah, let's see the definitions here. So what is happening here? Data sets represents the data structure within the data stores. So we have seen in the diagram that data sets here, in our diagram, what are the data sets? The containers are the, sorry, in our diagram, what are the data structures? The containers are the data structures. What is the data store? Blob is a data store, and the containers are the data structures which are present inside the blob storage. So if we want to point to a single container inside the blob storage, that is what it's been written here. So this data set will simply point or refer to the data you want to use in your activities as input or output. So simply for pointing to the data which you want to use in your activities, you will be using this data sets. So another example here, uh, for example, an Azure storage linked service specifies the connection string. As we already discussed, linked service specifies the connection string to connect to this Azure storage. Additionally, a Azure blob dataset specifies the blob container and the folder that contains the data. So in the dataset, you are precisely specifying what is the blob container from which you want to get the data, and you will also point to what the data you want to get from that container. So that is the dataset. That dataset is nothing but it is a pointer or the reference to the data you want to use in your activities. Coming to the linked service, it is the connection string which holds the connection information required to connect to an external resource. Okay, is it clear? Is the difference clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So coming to activity, what is this activity? So as we discussed in our paint, so as we discussed here, so here the entire flow, here the entire flow is having three different parts. So this single part is referred to an activity. So what will this activity do? It performs an action. A single action step is referred to as an activity. It is a processing step. So what is this processing step is? So here we are performing a single step. What is that performing? What is that single step? We are getting the data from on premises to cloud. So here it is one step. So again you are putting in the data lake. It is the other step. Performing the transformations on it. It is the other step. And loading the data into the synapse. It is the other step. So all these small steps which perform a single process are considered as an activity. So let's define that activity. So what is an activity? Activity represents a processing step in a pipeline. So since we have seen an example in the paint where we have process of all the steps. So a single step in it is referred to an activity. For example, you might use a copy activity to copy the data from one data store to another data store. So in our Azure Data Factory, we will be having something called as activities. What these activities do? These will perform a single step of operations. So one of the examples of an activity is copy activity. So this is the mostly used activity in our day-to-day tasks. So why do we use this copy activities is as in the name, it's just used to copy the data from one data store to another data stores. So similarly you might also use the spark activity. There is another activity called a spark activity which runs the spark code on the hd inside cluster. So data factory supports three types of activities. So in Azure Data Factory there will be many activities. So let me show you what are all those. So here as we can see, once we create a pipeline, you will be able to see the activities. So these are all the activities. So there'll be many activities. They have categorized the activities so that it will be easy for us to search. Okay. So this is the copy activity which we have discussed. So again, all these activities are categorized into three types. So what are these three types? Let's see. So here we have seen that I've told you that all those activities are categorized into three types. The first one is data movement, data transformation, and control activities. So all the activities present there are categorized into three types: data movement, data transformation, and control activities. What are data movement activities? The activities which are used to move the data come under this data movement activities. And coming to this data transformation activities, the activities which transform the data. That is, if you want to perform any transformations on the data, there are some activities present to do those transformations. So in that case, you will be using all the activities which are present under this data transformation activities. So other ones are control activities. So there are few activities like if activity, switch activity, and filter activity. So these activities come under this control activities. So what these control activities do, they'll control the flow. So which is to be executed first and which is to be executed next. So this is all about the activity. Did you guys understand like what is this activity?
Yes.
So activity is nothing but it's just a processing step in a pipeline. So these are very important concepts. Definitely you will be asked in interviews regarding these things. So that is the reason I have documented you very clearly regarding these all things. So coming to pipeline, let's now know what is this pipeline. So for example, you have a requirement to move the data from one container to another container, and after completion of this you need to send a mail, and after you send the mail you need to delete the data in the source container. So here in this scenario, how many steps are present? So my requirement here is I need to move the data from one container to another. So once this gets completed, I need to send a completion mail. So after sending that completion mail, I need to delete the data present in the source container. So in total, how many steps are present? Can anyone of you tell it? How many
Yeah,
steps
I
are they
think
have?
first we have to create a link service to the source, and also for the same link services to the
No,
target.
no, not all those details. I'm just asking how many steps are present. Just
Three steps.
so first, the first step is we are move the data from one container to another container. That is the first step. So once this movement is done, then we need to send the mail. This is the other step. And the third step is you need to delete the data in the source container. Okay, so these are the three steps which are present. So it's good that you are telling in detail, but here my intention is just to tell the steps vaguely, not
Yeah,
in
fine,
detail.
fine.
Yeah, yeah. So here we can see that there are three steps. So how will you combine all these three steps? So to combine all these three steps, the concept of pipeline is here for you. So if you want to perform sequence of activities, that is you want to combine all the activities and execute, then you will use a pipeline. So what does this pipeline contains is, this pipelines contain the group of activities. So all this group of activities which perform a unit of work. So put it in words, data factory may have one or more pipelines. So since we have shown Once you create a data factory, that data factory can have one or more pipelines. So to define a pipeline is a logical grouping of activities that performs a unit of work. So what is happening in the scenario which we have discussed? There are many subtasks. So all that subtasks are combined, logically combined into a single unit of work. So how will you combine all those things? You will combine all those things using this pipeline. So together, the activities in a pipeline perform a task. So this is an example. A pipeline can contain the group of activities as we discussed that ingest the data from blob storage and run a Hive query on HT inside cluster to partition the data. So here, this is one. Ingest the data from Azure Blob Storage is the first task, and the other task is run the Hive query on the HT inside cluster. So this is the second task. So how are we combining both these tasks? We are combining these tasks using a pipeline. So pipeline is where you logically group the tasks. So tasks in the sense activities. You logically group the activities, and then those all activities together perform a unit of work. So what is the benefit of using this pipeline? So the benefit of using the pipeline is that you will be able to manage the activities as a set. Since this pipeline is giving us the ability to combine the activities, now you will be able to manage these activities as a set instead of managing each of them individually. So when you use pipelines, you will be able to manage all the activities as a set instead of managing each activities individually. The activities in a pipeline can be chained together to operate sequentially, or they can operate independently in pipeline. So what this point is saying is, so inside a pipeline, it need not be a situation wherein all the activities are connected to each other. So what I want to say is, these activities which are present inside the pipeline can run in parallel. That is, independently they can run. So it is not necessary that only after completion of one activity the other activity should run, only after completion of the second activity third activity should run. So there is no compulsion like that. You can either design your pipeline in such a way that activities can run in parallel, or the activities can be run in sequential. So it all depends upon the scenario um, which you implement. So you should analyze the situation, like how can we run these activities? Is it okay if these activities run in parallel? So if the activities run in parallel, what happens? So the time required to run the pipeline decreases. Since you are running these activities in parallel, what happens? All the activities will run in parallel, and the time required for the pipeline to get complete will be low. I mean, less time when you run your activities in parallel. But again, it all depends upon the scenario which you are handling. There be few scenarios wherein for the second activity to run, the first activity should complete first. So in such scenarios, you will not be able to run your activities in parallel. So in few scenarios, you will be able to run your activities in parallel. So okay, is the concept of pipeline clear to you guys?
Excuse me, can we run multiple pipeline at once time?
Yeah.
One time. Okay.
Yes, yes, yes. You can run any number of pipelines at once.
Okay.
You are asking about pipelines or activities?
Pipeline, data
Yeah, yeah.
ingestion
You can
pipeline.
run any number of pipelines at once. So to automate the pipeline runs, we have some other concept called as triggers. So these triggers are used to automate this pipeline runs. So what happens here is, once you create a pipeline, so you don't want to daily go to that pipeline and run that pipeline manually. So if at all you want to schedule your pipeline, you can use the concept of triggers. So triggers represent the unit of processing that determines when a pipeline execution needs to be kicked off. So you can here, using triggers, specify when the pipeline should execute. So here we will be having three different types of triggers. The first trigger is schedule trigger. The second one is tumbling window trigger, and the third one is event trigger. So in the schedule, when you will use the schedule trigger is, if you want your pipeline to execute daily at a particular point of time. So if you want your pipeline to execute daily at 9 o'clock in the morning, so you'll schedule it using the schedule trigger. So in the schedule trigger, you will be giving the time that you want it to run daily. So you'll be selecting that this pipeline should run daily, and also you'll be giving at what time should this pipeline run. So you'll be, if you want to run that pipeline at 9 a.m. EST, then you'll be giving that it should run at the 9 a.m. EST. And then coming to tumbling window trigger. So if you want to process the historical data, then you will go with this tumbling window trigger. So you need not worry about these triggers. We'll be again learning about them clearly in the upcoming classes. So coming to the event trigger. So if you want to invoke your pipelines based on occurrence of an event, then you will go with this event based triggers. For example, if you want to run a pipeline whenever a file enters into the blob storage. So if you want to run a pipeline whenever a file enters into the blob storage, then you will be using this event triggers. So there are some other events also. So on deletion of a file from blob storage, if you want to trigger a pipeline, then like that. So if you want to trigger any pipeline based on the occurrence of some event, then you will be using this event triggers. So these are the types of triggers which are available to you. So again, we'll be discussing them in detail. So coming to parameters. So what are these parameters are? So if at all you want to send any data dynamically to a pipeline, so that is, when you're running a pipeline, then you want to send the data to the pipeline, then you will use this concept of parameters. So if you want to pass any values to a pipeline dynamically, then you will use these parameters. So these parameters are nothing but a key value pairs. So these key value pairs are also of read-only configuration. So what do you mean by read-only is, you will not be able to modify these parameters inside a pipeline. You can just only read them. You won't be able to modify those parameters inside the pipeline. So that is what it is meant by read-only configuration. And coming to the types of parameters, you have two types of parameters. The first one is the global parameter, and the second one is pipeline parameter. So what do you mean by this global parameter is, so whenever you create a global parameter, it will be accessed by all of the pipelines. So for example, you have created an Azure Data Factory. So inside the Azure Data Factory, you have created 100 pipelines. So if you want a variable that should be accessed by all the 100 pipelines, then you will go with this global parameter. So global parameter is the parameter which will be available for all of the pipelines. So all of your pipelines will be able to access this global parameters. And coming to pipeline parameters, these type of parameters are particular to a specific pipeline. So whenever you create a pipeline parameter, it is limited to only that particular pipeline for which you have created. And whereas in global parameters, all the pipelines which are present in the Azure Data Factory can access those parameters. Okay, is this clear? This is clear, guys.
Yes, fine.
Yeah. So here, let's see an example like someone when asked previously, they were telling in detail like I'll create a linked service and then all of this. So let's see how we will implement the concept of pipeline in Azure Data Factory. So what happens here? So in the layman terms, let's discuss the concept in layman terms. So let's take an examples of packers and movers. So what are these packers and movers having is, what is their task is, they need to move this P1 and P2 objects from one house to another house. So how will they do that? So first, to access this P1 and P2 objects, they need to authorize. That is, they need to enter this house, they need keys. So first, to enter this house, what they need? They need to authenticate themselves. How will they authenticate? With the help of keys. So whenever they use the keys which fits this house key, then only this house will be open. I mean, the door of the house will be open. So this thing you can compare to. So what is happening here? We are keeping the keys which fits into the door key. So here, when compared to Azure Data Factory, this is the keys and addresses. Here, what is this keys and addresses? Where you will store the keys and addresses? You will be storing these keys and addresses in linked service. So linked service can be related to as keys of your door. So once you authenticate yourself, so once you are able to connect to the house, then what you will do? You will go inside the house. So once you go inside the house, you will pack this P1 and P2. So you will get this P1 and P2 and pack them.
This is that data set, right? That room is data set, I guess.
Yeah, data set are this P1 and P2 are the data sets.
Okay, okay.
So here you will be creating the data sets. So what are this data packing? Packing in the sense, this packed ones will hold this P1 and P2. So here the packing can be related to data sets. So here the data set is present. So what is present in the middle? Here our thing is moving from one house to other house. So in case of Azure, when you want to move something from one place to other place, that is, for example, here you are moving the data from SQL server to the blob storage. What is happening here? First, using keys and addresses, that is using linked service, you are establishing a connection to the SQL Server database. So once you establish the connection to the database, what happens? You need to connect to the specifically T1 and T2. So to point to specific T1 and T2 tables, what you use the data sets. So in the middle, to move this, to make the movement, you will be using this copy activity. So here in the case, the deliver, who is the person who will do this? The delivery boy. So what is this delivery boy? He will bring again to the house to, he will unpack it. So this can be compared to the data set which you create for storing the output in the blob storage. So first you need to create a data set. Here the unpacking is done, and then again you need to open. So if for you opening the house, you need keys and addresses. So those keys and addresses are nothing but the linked service. So here you need to create a linked service. So once you create a linked service, you get the access to this home, and now you will be able to place the data here. So in the same way, once you create the linked service and data sets, you will be able to access this folder, and you will be placing the file in this folder. So here, who are doing all these things? All these things are done by the delivery boy. So who is the one who is managing the delivery manager is the one who is managing. So delivery manager will direct the delivery boy, so what to do, when to do, where to do. So this delivery manager can be compared to Azure Data Factory. So in the Azure Data Factory, you are telling them where to do, when to do, and what to do. So here our delivery boy is integration runtime. So we have not covered the concept of integration runtime. Probably in the next class we'll be covering that. So what is this integration runtime? Is integration runtime is nothing but it's the compute infrastructure which is necessary for us to perform all these things. So here delivery boy is the integration runtime. So this is the concept. Is it clear?
Yeah, yes, it's a good explanation. Thank you.
Yeah. So any doubts? Any doubts, guys?
Under this, under I mean the data factory, we can perform only one activity. Or I mean, one activity means, say, for example, you said, right, copy the file from one container to another container, right? So for that one,
Yeah.
we need to create one Azure Data Factory so that it will do only that task, or I can do
Yeah.
multiple things.
Yes, yes. Once you create an Azure Data Factory, you can create any number of pipelines. You can create any number of pipelines, and those pipelines, and one limitation is there. So inside the pipelines, you can only have 60 activities. You can't exceed 60
60. Okay.
activities. Yeah. But coming to
But I
pipelines, you
can
can
have
create any
my, any number of pipeline.
pipelines. Yes. So any other doubts?
Can you explain in short this term, uh, the key and address?
So KN address is nothing but the linked service which we have discussed. Linked service, it is just a connection string. So for example, if you want to create a linked service for the Facebook, your Facebook account, what you will be giving? What are all the things necessary for you to connect? I mean to open your Facebook.
Yeah,
What you'll
the
enter?
password and username.
Username and password.
Yes,
So so
this is a
likewise,
key.
yeah, every
Yeah,
service will have a key, credentials. So every service will
credential.
have a certain type of credentials. For Facebook, you'll be having username and password. For some blob storage, you will be having key. So
Okay,
key is
key to
nothing but
connect the
uh,
database to, you know,
yeah,
data source.
yes. So if you want to connect to a database, what are all necessary? Not in cloud generally. So what in general you require? You require the database name and what is the table name and all those password, username and password. So in the same way, this linked service will hold all the connection information necessary for you to connect to an external resource. So here keys and
Oh,
addresses refer to the linked services.
okay.
Is it clear to everyone? Are the concepts clear to all?
So, have to means suppose we use two activities. So for the two activities we have to define the two key value.
Your voice is breaking, Gaurav.
Hello, hello.
Yeah.
Suppose I have I have used two activities. For the first activity like data ingestion, and second activity like my uh, code implement, code running. So for both activities we have to use the key matlab, particular key for the database or particular key for the data ingestion. So one key will be used, or different, we have to define the different key for the both activities.
So it depends on the how many resources you are using. So how many ever resources you are using, so that many linked services you need to create.
Okay.
Yeah. So okay, any more doubts?
No, thank you.
Yeah, okay, guys. Then, and one more thing is that tomorrow I'm having some office connect, so we won't be having class tomorrow. That is the reason I have taken class today for 1.5 hour. So, and also on Monday also I will not be taking class. So again we'll be connecting on 10th Friday. So on Friday also it will be 1.5 hour class. Yeah, just informing you prior, so that even if you have any vacation you can plan it. Okay, guys. Have a good day. Thank you.